Today we're going to be taking a walk through the Cheshire Land Trust's 33-acre Fresh Meadows property in South Cheshire off of Cook Hill Road. This property was given to the Cheshire Land Trust back in 1985. A subdivision had been proposed for this property. All of the topsoil was even stripped off of it. There were no trees or vegetation anywhere across this property. And at that point, the Cheshire Neighborhood Association was formed by a number of neighbors who surround this land. They used their own money and raised funds to purchase the property and then gave it to the Cheshire Land Trust for stewardship into the future. Since that time, quite a bit of the property has grown back. As we walk around, we'll see some different habitat areas, different types of vegetation. We'll take a look at a small ridge line that runs along the east side of the property, and also take a look down at the Mill River, which runs along the west side of the property. So let's go for a walk. We're standing in a vernal pool area in the south end of the Fresh Meadows property. This is an area that is somewhat common across parts of the southern New England landscape. These are small depression areas in the landscape that are approximately 40 feet wide in both directions, maybe 2 to 3 feet deep. It's a depressional area that's somewhat common in the southern New England landscape. We have the bog bridge running across this side to give an idea that it does fill up with water, maybe about 8 to 10 inches of water at its deepest point. It looks rather overgrown during the summer, but it's not needed during the summer. It's very dry now, especially this year. We've had an extremely dry summer, so this area is bone dry, and if you only visited this spot during the summertime, you probably have no idea that it actually did get wet during other times of the year. The Land Trust has about 1.5 miles of trails around the Fresh Meadows property. This sign is one of the typical signs that are located around the property to help hikers find their way around. Most of the trails are quite flat. There is one spot with a few little slopes, but if you are somewhere in the south end of Cheshire and looking for a quick 10 or 15 minute walk, this is a terrific property to stop by on and have a nice, easy, flat little walk around for a few minutes. In addition to the signs, a number of the trees are blazed with little paint marks, either blue or yellow, that make it relatively easy to find your way around during different times of the year. While this property is called the Fresh Meadows property, quite a bit of it is actually wooded. So we do have areas that the Land Trust maintains as meadow. So we have meadow species such as these goldenrods and milkweeds and other grasses, but the areas that are not maintained as meadow quickly start growing back up into forest. Having a forest is actually one of the easiest things to do in this part of the world. All you really have to do is stop cutting the lawn. So in these areas where no cutting does occur, the tree species will quickly start revegetating and taking over, and the meadows will quickly disappear. It's very important from a habitat diversity standpoint to have the meadows. They're home to quite a few species that have become naturalized in this part of the world and species that we do like. And having the mixture of meadows and forest land next to each other creates quite a bit of edge that's popular for many bird species, and especially raptors. Those large birds will hang out in the tops of the tall trees and just look and survey the area in the meadow, looking for small critters such as voles or moles or mice, and swoop down and get them when they see them crawling around. We're up in the north portion of the Fresh Meadows property now. We're in an area that's a bit of a mix of mowed areas, a little bit of meadow, and some trees coming in. And some of the tree species that are behind me are red cedars and white pine trees. These are two species that'll frequently be some of the first trees that grow in an area when it's converting from grassland into forest land. They're both very quick growing species, very light loving. The cedar trees in particular are one species that'll grow in areas that used to be former pasture. While this property wasn't pasture, at least in the recent past, the hard soil conditions that existed after all of the topsoil was stripped off of it back in the early 1980s is somewhat similar to the hard compacted conditions that you would find in a former pasture area. So there are many cedar trees and pine trees currently in this property in the areas that aren't maintained as meadow and are being allowed to go back to forest. Those softwood species, or those conifer species such as the pines and cedars, will eventually be overtopped by hardwood species such as maples, oaks, and some others. There are about 1.5 miles of trails around the Fresh Meadow property that are open to hikers. We do welcome folks to come out and enjoy these trails as much as they're interested in doing. We encourage use all times of year. The trails are open 7 days a week from dawn to dusk. We do, however, ask that everybody respect our neighbors and the Cheshire Land Trust stewardship efforts by staying on the trails at all times. The meadow areas of Fresh Meadows can be a very popular area for many bird species that enjoy living in meadow-type habitats. The birdhouses that are scattered around the property, such as the one behind me, are for bluebirds, which can be seen during during certain times of year around the property. They're a very vivid blue. They really do live up to their name, so it's certainly worth coming out and taking a hike around, seeing if you can spot one. The bird species are quite plentiful in the area, and this property is quite well known for folks in the Cheshire vicinity that are into birding. Anyone interested in bird watching that hasn't been out to the Fresh Meadows property would highly recommend coming out and taking a walk. It's quite diverse as far as bird species go and quite well known among a lot of people that are into bird watching. We're standing along the Fresh Meadows Ridge Trail, which is in the northeast portion of the property. It runs up and along a small ridge that is about 50 or 60 feet higher than the bulk of the property, which is quite flat. This ridge is actually just a step up the ridge. Another step up crosses Sperry Road, and then one additional step leads into the Cheshire Land Trust Brook Memorial property. Standing in the vicinity of the Jean May Bench, looking out toward the west, there are some very nice views of Prospect Ridge, especially during the winter months when the leaves are off the trees. During the summer months, that view is a bit blocked by the foliage, which is mostly provided by sugar maples and chestnut and red oak trees. In some areas of the Fresh Meadows property, along with many open space properties, there are quite a few invasive species that are crowding in. This one example of an invasive species on this property is autumn olive, which is creeping into the trails and some other open areas. These species can be a problem in some areas because they will tend to crowd out some of the more native species, crowd out some of the habitat that native animal species are accustomed to, and they don't have any natural predators that will be eating some of the invasives. When the invasives such as autumn olive berries are eaten, the seeds can easily be scattered by birds, which just compounds the problem. Welcome to the Cheshire Land Trust's Ives Farm property. This property was gifted to the Cheshire Land Trust by Betty Ives in 2006. While the property is commonly known as Ives Farm, about half of the property is actually wooded. Most folks in town are used to seeing the fields at Ives Farm as they drive back and forth on Cheshire Street. But today we're going to be taking a walk through the wooded portion, the Ives Farm woodlands, taking a look at some of the trails and how a property will revert from a agricultural or field type condition into a full forest condition. All of the trails throughout the Ives Farm woodland are open to the public most of the year from dawn to dusk. The trails are available for walking, hiking, bird watching, and in the winter months, snowshoeing. In many areas of the woods, both in Cheshire and much of Connecticut and all across the Northeast, it's very common to see stone walls. These walls were not built in forests. These walls were built as fields were being developed by colonists in the 1600s and 1700s, and even into the 1800s. This wall was probably dividing two different fields, and we can commonly find evidence of the different fields by differences in the forest structure on both sides of the wall. In former agricultural areas, after you have a stage of grasses and shrubs, the next step in forest succession is for trees to move in. In a lot of pasture areas, former pasture areas, one of the first tree species to move in is red cedar. We have red cedar trees around us in this part of the Ives Farm woodland, and we also have a few black birches that are starting to grow in. Cedars will have a very healthy, full crown on them until the hardwood species, such as this birch, start to grow around and above them. As that happens, the cedars get shaded out, they don't get the sunlight that they need, and the branches start to recede upward. As the branches recede up, the live crown gets higher and higher in the tree, and you end up with trees that are shaped somewhat like lollipops. Once the cedar trees get shaded out by the hardwoods, the property owner needs to make a choice. In the case of Ives Farm woodland, it's the land trust that needs to make a management decision. Some of the choices in this type of situation are that the cedars could be cut down and used for fence posts or other purposes. The hardwoods could be cut to allow the cedars to re-thrive and increase more diversity in the forest structure, or the cedars could be left in their dead state and just maintained for habitat purposes. The westernmost portion of the Ives Farm woodland is an excellent example of an oak forest. This is the final stage of forest development that would be seen after cedars are crowded out by light-loving hardwood species, and shade-loving hardwoods such as oaks and hickories are able to grow and dominate the area. Most of the trees around me are oaks. A lot of them are red oaks mixed in with a few black oak and white oak. We also have maples, hickories, and a few other hardwood species. The oaks are very important for wildlife because of the acorns that they generate. The acorns are collected by animals during the fall and used as food source during the winter and spring months.
trust early on was acquiring property. We were all very grateful for all of that. Over time, there were some evolutions in how we received donations. Among them was Lee Pells. Lee Pells donated 13 acres of land to the Cheshire Land Trust, which abut the Ives farm. Lee was a friend of the Ives family. They sat in the field at night looking at sunset, as she would describe it, and it was the most beautiful place on earth. Not a one of us had a notion that we could ever purchase the property, we would ever own it, we would ever be a beneficiary, but we could at least ask. 2006, of course, is when the Cheshire Land Trust received the wonderful news that we were the beneficiary of this rather substantial piece of property. The property has 47 tillable acres, and it's just a remarkable place that is going to go on, we would hope, for the next 100 years.
The Ives farm is a working farm, and one of the things for harvesting, to make sure the produce is fresh going out to restaurants and to stores throughout New England. The flatbed trailer is brought out to the fields by tractor. The harvest workers will use crates such as this, and they pack in the fruit. Once the trailer is loaded, it is brought up to the washing station, and at the washing station it is run through, it is washed, it's graded, the vegetables, based on quality, and it's put into boxes where it's loaded up onto trucks at the back of the refrigerated trucks at the back of the washing stations, and this ensures high quality product to the stores and restaurants throughout New England.